basically, BFA came out, you lost artifact weapons, you lost the Crucible system, you lost Legion legendaries, you lost tier bonuses. They added a lot of offensive cooldowns onto the GCD. You lost like a ton of really, really good parts of the game, and it was replaced by untradeable, only one tier 1 slot Azshara. Legion was like, we're giving you Mythic Plus, and then BFA on the same slide for BFA was like, we're giving you Warfronts and Isles. Dratnos made a YouTube video last night that I thought was super interesting, called Ranking Every Patch since Legion. And we talk about this all the time. So I was thinking we do the same thing. And so what we're going to do is talk about and discuss and do our own rankings. So let's go all the way back to Legion. So beginning of Legion, that's hard. Okay, so the beginning of Legion was the worst part of Legion by far. Like, and it actually totally depended. So the beginning of Legion was actually awesome if you got the legendary you wanted. So like basically 5% of the population would probably rate this as an S. No, I can't say it's an S because like later Legion patches were just objectively better than the first one. Like they just added a lot to the game. So I'm thinking it's like a nice C. We're not going to overthink about it too much because when we're reacting to Dratnos, we will have chances to like think on what he's saying and recollect and stuff like that. So let's grab the original Legion patch and put that in C. And this is just my opinion, right? If you played casually, it'd be very different. So Return to Karazhan, what patch was that? Was that Nighthold? Or does this first entire thing include Nighthold? I think Return to Karazhan might have been in between Nighthold and Tomb, but its own thing. He counts Nighthold with this. You know what? I'd put it in a B then. Even with the legendary thing. I would still put that there. And this is weird. So is Karazhan truly just a patch? Yeah, Legion is going to be hard to look at. Since BFA, everything will make sense. But Legion kind of followed a different patch structure. I mean, but Karazhan was a fucking banger, though. I mean, it would have just been a better time to play WoW than regular Legion. I'm going to say it's also in B. I don't know. It's just like the same game, basically. Like, Karazhan was sick, but so was Nighthold. Tomb of Sargeras definitely bounces up one patch. So Tomb wasn't as good of a raid as Nighthold. But this is actually the patch where if you were playing since the beginning, you had every legendary you wanted. So if you like, the biggest issue with Legion was they made these really cool legendaries and you just RNG your character sucked or it was good. And Tomb of Sargeras is officially when that ended. Lip, I always use Lip as an example. Lip actually played in Nighthold and he played the game more than everyone all day, every day. Every single chance he could have had to loot a legendary, he did it. And he wore, I forget the legendary, what it was now. It was like a Rep Paladin legendary that was completely useless, and it was his best one. That was really, really good. Also, was this the Mage Tower? Did this patch come out with the Mage Tower? Or was that like mid? 7.0 is B tier. Damn, nostalgia goggles are strong with that shit. You have to keep in mind it was all the way till Nighthold. So you have to include, it had like one of the best raids ever. And Trial of Valor was great too. Shadows of Argus, World of Warcraft. So the only thing that this is the Argus patch. This added a zone, which I think the Argus zone was one of the better zones they've made since MoP. Like the Timeless Isles, like the OG one. It added the Crucible system, which in my opinion didn't add really anything to the game. At this point, you already had all the legendaries you needed. They did allow you to craft or like select legendaries from a vendor in this patch though. So that like helped maybe a lot of the more casual players. I don't think it would go down to a B because it's objectively better than the beginning of Legion. So I'd put this in like a nice A. Oh, interestingly enough, too, they added 2 dungeons this expansion. In Tomb of Sargeras, they added Cathedral of the Eternal Night, and in Argus, they added Seat of the Triumvirate. Seat of the Triumvirate, very, very disliked dungeon. I actually really like the dungeon, but again, I only did it in the MDI, and it was really fun. And Cathedral is like unassailably a great dungeon. Like, it's actually really, really fucking good. Beginning of BFA. So this is an absolute fucking donkey tier. Okay, so I don't know if it's an F, but it was really, really bad. Specifically the first patch. And it was mainly because of this feeling. This feeling existed for all of the Borrowed Power patches or expansions where, like, you would, like, end an expansion with everything rolling on full cylinders, and then you would start the next one with all of those things being gone. And specifically the beginning of BFA didn't give you anything in return for it. I feel like it is F. because the feeling of the previous patch being an A and the beginning of BFA feeling like an F, that amount of difference, like visually for me, actually lines up with how that felt at the time. Like, that sounds correct. Uldir was fine. You were seeing the Mythic Plus dungeons in that expansion for the first time, and they were all really good. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. We're gonna come back. We're gonna go do Sargeras, and then we'll finish the rest of these rankings, and then we will talk about Dratnos' ones. All right. So basically, the thought so far is beginning of Legion up until Nighthold. Definitely not awesome. Man, actually, I'm already kind of feeling not great about this. Okay, would you say that at Legion's height, it was an S tier expansion? I think the answer is yes. So that means that whatever the best part of Legion was has to be an S tier patch, right? That's my only thought. Now, see, obviously, like, you have to establish a baseline rating, right? Like, for example, two almost identical people could make a tier list with identical takes, and all of their things could be like one letter higher than the other because their baseline they established was different. But I would say the way that I think establishing the baseline makes the most sense is the best Legion patch has to be an S tier, because I think when Legion was at its best, it was an S tier expansion. So you would basically just move Tomb and Argus up to S, and then you're basically asking yourself if not having the legendaries you wanted at the beginning of the expansion actually... Oh, that's so annoying. That's fine. It's easy to fix since this is so early. My only question is, when did Return to Karazhan actually come out? Battle for Azeroth, Return to Karazhan. It was in October 2016. It was before Nighthold. 7.1 was Trial of Valor release. 7.1.5 is when we had Nighthold. Okay, so Emerald Nightmare came out in like August of 2016. So this was this just 2 months after the expansion? They ripped a mega dungeon that fast? Dude, am I remembering this crazy? Interesting. Okay, so Karazhan includes Nighthold, and Legion is kind of its own thing. So I would say Karazhan, you still didn't have at least as a PvE player, I don't know if this affected PvP, I don't know if this affected people who play for lore, but like, this game was absolutely fucked if you did not loot your best legendary. It was the worst feeling of all time. So yeah, Legion is just Emerald Nightmare, one of the most disappointing raids they've made, and Mythic, I mean, okay, then how do you, this is the first time Mythic Plus was ever in the game though, and that's like pretty massive. But the thing is Mythic Plus exists even in a better form in every other patch after this. So like, do you basically give the first patch of Legion credit for all of Mythic Plus? That doesn't seem right. I'm going to put the first patch of Legion down in C. I'm going to put this one in B, because Karazhan as content being added is great. And then again, Tomb of Sargeras, I mentioned this before, this is the first time in Legion where you as a player playing all day every day were guaranteed to have the legendary you wanted. By this, if you had been playing Legion the whole time, by this patch, you just straight up had what you wanted legendary-wise. So I think it gets a massive boost from that. I think the beginning of Legion would be way up here. Not to mention Tomb of Sargeras was an awesome raid. So I would say it bounces all the way up to S, in my opinion there, and I would say that kind of continued through Argus. The like 60% of the way through Legion, all the way through the end, was, I think, probably as good as WoW ever was. I think the only comparable time was Mist of Pandaria, and that was a super long time ago, not really relatable to a lot of people, and it's not included in this list. So I would just say definitely S tier. Okay, and then we moved to the beginning of BFA. Basically, BFA came out, you lost artifact weapons, you lost the Crucible system, you lost Legion legendaries. You just lost, like, you lost tier bonuses. You lost, like, a ton of really, really good parts of the game, and it was replaced by untradeable, only one tier 1 slot Azerite armor. The title cards for BFA on release were Warfronts and Islands. They didn't hit, right? So, like, the thing that, like, compared to Legion, right? Legion was like, we're giving you Mythic Plus, and then BFA on the same slide for BFA was like, we're giving you Warfronts and Islands. So, like, crazy thought there. Yeah, oh yeah, and then they also introduced the AoE cap into the game. They added a lot of offensive cooldowns onto the GCD, and they added seasons to seasonal affixes to Mythic Plus, and their first attempt at that was infested. Oh, was AoE cap Shadowlands? Okay, it was the GCD change. My bad. Thank you. My bad. It was the GCD change was BFA, which was bad too though. Like GCD change, arguably worse than AoE cap actually, because AoE cap was a big problem because it affected some people and not all. They largely moved away from it and made it better. But like, dude, imagine your main offensive cooldown right now going, not changing at all, but just randomly being on the cooldown now. It made your class just feel significantly worse. 1 second, I can't think with the dogs freaking out. What was I saying? The raid was pretty, like, Old Deer was a pretty good raid. So that was a huge drop off. And maybe more than anything, it was just the pure shock value of Legion and then this. So big fall off there. All right, let's do Tides of Vengeance. So I believe this was Battle for of Dazar'alor, that raid. It was there any other real content? Also, I believe, interestingly enough, Tides of Vengeance will include Crucible of Storms. So this definitely goes up from Battle of Azeroth. Is this the patch where you got 2 tier 1 Azerite traits? I think it was. I think they basically made Azerite armor, instead of giving you 1 tier 1 trait, it gave you 2 rings of the tier 1s. And that was actually, that made Azerite armor like way better. Also, for whatever reason, if you guys care about the artifact power or Azerite power grind, this was one of the hardest grinds they ever had. It actually, Azerite power only got easier after this point. This was like one of the biggest grinds there ever was. It also, the seasonal affix in Mythic Plus was Reaping. Reaping's a weird affix. It's I think largely you think about like what makes you have fun in Mythic Plus. Mass AoEing is actually really fun. Like most of the people, especially DPS players, if you mass AoE, you're like, I'm having fun now. And also, you think about why some seasonal affixes are really liked, is you're like, oh, they gave you some positive benefits. Like Awakened allowed you to skip some things really easily, and it also enabled you to, if you were able to cleave things down on the last boss, you could, rather than killing them earlier. Awesome affix, right? Encrypted gave you CDR, it gave you movement speed, it gave you haste. There's like the Kiss Curse element to basically all of the good ones. Shrouded, same thing. This was actually Kiss Curse in a weird way. So like all of the ads could obviously give you a chance to wipe, and you had to deal with it and dispel the tank debuff. But the way the game works and what the popular strats and comps were at the time were you actually used all of those ads to like beat the fuck out of bosses. You can go back and look at clips. There are people who like used Unholy Decays specifically with Festermite to like do the most boss damage you could possibly imagine. It completely dominated the MDI. Really fun to play with. And that is why that affix was great. I do think it gets a little bit of a downside though. I actually pretty strongly believe that any seasonal affix that is interacted with by doing only 20% of the count, I think those suck. They don't like suck and it's like objective and it's like it's over, like they just suck no matter what, there's no upside to them. I just think it's an extreme downside of any affix to ever limit the routing of your dungeon to in 20% increments. It's just super boring and it allows for very little creativity. So I think that's the downside of Reaping. But overall, one of the better affixes. I don't think it's like a negative one. So the raid was good. I think Battle of Dazar'alor is actually one of the most well-liked raids, really, in like the past 5 to 6 years, I think. I think you could probably only give this plus, like on the plus side, you could only really have this as a positive. But it contained Crucible of Storms. So was Crucible of Storms a good thing for the game? I think Crucible came like 2.5 or 3 months after Battle of Dazar'alor. It was like really difficult. They made only 2 bosses. Both of them were very challenging. Forget like the bugs and overtuning and stuff. Like obviously that boss was super overtuned, and the version of that boss that was killed was way nerfed from the original hard version. Really hard version. I don't know if a lot of people will look back fondly on that. I think that was like kind of a mistake on Blizzard's part. It wasn't like think about how hyped the Race World first was. It wasn't like really hyped during that race. It was like super whatever. Like viewership wise and intrigue wise, it was kind of just like looked over, even at the time. And a lot of casual players were like really upset because they're like, what the fuck? Like, we're not even done with this previous raid. Like, you're giving us too much at once. And it wasn't a pushover. It was on heroic, but not on like the harder difficulty. So it's super weird. Also, the gear was like super lame. Like the rewards for this raid like weren't even really wanted. They were kind of weak. I just don't know. I don't know if it's going to affect my ranking of this patch at all. or if it's like up or down, I don't know, but it's just not significant in either way. That being said, I think this was I think the tier 1 Azerite trait alone, the extra tier 1 Azerite trait made that feel a lot better. If you were in a top guild at the time, you guys will remember Residum and the pains that created. I think overall pretty good. Would you say it was a jump from F all the way to B? I would say so, because like Mythic Plus was a lot better. I think Infested really brought down... One second, I needed to deal with this dog. I won't be able to think. It really felt like I almost feel like I said before, I think Infested to Reaping was a tier alone if you're a PvE. And I guess maybe one thing to say is this whole entire list is going to be based on like PvE, in my opinion. That's like how I played the game. And then on top of that, it had a much better raid than Uldir, and they fixed the Azerite armor. So I feel like this jumps up two full tiers, in my opinion. Oh, I just realized the end of BFA is going to be like really controversial, but I mean, this is just my opinion. Okay, Azshara. So let's start with the raid. I think Eternal Palace was pretty good. I actually think the meat of Eternal Palace was great. The first 3 bosses were all like kind of whatever. Ashvane, absolute all-time great fight. Orgazoa, great mid-tier fight. Queen's Court, fine fight. Zakul, great fight. Some problems with Zakul, but really, really enjoyed all of the time we spent progressing Zakul. And Queen Azshara was a horrific end boss. And specifically, this is the last time this ever happened, but like the way that the boss that was handled in the Race World first was like just absolutely egregious. Like I'm trying to think of anything you can compare it to now. Like I guess Razageth might be the closest, but okay, here's what Razageth would have been, okay? Imagine, you guys remember when they nerfed P3 in Razageth to just be like instantly killable? Imagine instead of us being on that P3 for 1 day, imagine we were on it for 3 full days. And there was, it was even worse. That's not even a good point. It's not the end of the fight. It was like, I don't know. Imagine like the P2 intermission was impossible. Like 30 seconds in, you just wiped for 3 full days. And then they just nerfed it and the boss instantly died. That's basically what it is. It'd be combining the Razageth nerf with imagining that the thing that was impossible was the previous phase. That's what happened on Azshara. They kind of have been way better at dealing with that kind of stuff since then, but it did happen. It was super annoying. The zone in this patch was Nazjatar. Nazjatar overall actually a really good and cool zone. I think it's one of the better zones they've made. One small problem. They had something called Benthic gear, which I think was fine on its own, but they made it way too strong. Oh yeah, Nazjatar and Mechagon, they came out at the same time. So it was also when they released the... Was Operation Mechagon later in the patch, or did it come out initially with Mechagon? I think it was later in the patch. But it did come out within this patch, though. It came out initially. Okay, sweet. Okay, I didn't even know that. All right, I didn't remember that. So let's stick to Nazjatar for now. So Nazjatar, really cool zone. Small problem. There was this gear called Benthic gear, and it was super RNG, and it could roll sockets, and it had effects on it. Maybe I can find an example of Benthic gear actually to show you. So it would be like this. So you'd be looking at something like some pair of boots. Gain 82 mastery for X amount of seconds after killing an aberration in Nazjatar or the Eternal Palace. Heal for X amount after killing a Naga in this or the Eternal Palace. And there's a whole bunch more. You can probably identify some that are super good. You do 2% increased damage to aberrations in Eternal Palace or Nazjatar. There's just a bunch of like really good ones. Anyways, most of your gear, I want to say almost everyone was wearing like 4 to 5 pieces of this gear. And to get it, you had to farm a million amounts of just so many pearls from the zone to keep rolling this gear for it to RNG upgrade and be socketed, and then that was now best in slot for you in the raid only for the entire rest of the patch. No matter what, if you looted the highest eye level mythic item in the raid, you were fucked. I don't know. It was like really bad. No matter what, you were forced to wear these items. So eye level upgrades basically didn't exist. You were full bis from day 1 in raid, but it was just super shitty low eye level gear. So like your like eye level was dog shit. But you had to collect other gear for Mythic Plus. It was like so weird. I just think the whole Benthic thing was a huge failure. Mechagon was another great zone, just like Nazjatar. I think there was a little bit less to do in Mechagon, ton of mounts and stuff. But they had the Operation Mechagon Mega Dungeon, which you can kind of say this about every Mega Dungeon, kind of a spoiler for later, but they don't really miss on Mega Dungeons. Mega Dungeons is something that they have done for the past 4 or 5 years that have been 5 or 6 years that have just been fucking awesome all the time. There was a really cool trinket in Mechagon, the punch card thing. or like the little laser trinket that you put a certain punch card in it and it did a bunch of damage. That was actually used in the raid. Kind of a cool, unique trinket from the island. But then they also had the seasonal affix of Beguiling, which was not... It was definitely a downgrade from Reaping. Actually, I think I've heard some people argue that they thought Beguiling was actually the worst affix they've ever made. So kind of bad. Major thing though, we've kind of touched through most of the other stuff in PvE, but the main thing in the game they added in this patch was the essence system, which in my opinion vastly improved the quality of this expansion. I would say, I wouldn't even say it saved it, because I think in hindsight, I think the game after the initial launch of BFA was actually pretty good. I mean, one of the best things they've ever added to the game mid-expansion. It would be way up there with the list of things. So I would, that alone is going to give this a really, really high ranking. I think they learned a lot from the Essence system. If they were going to continue down the borrowed power path for longer, I think Essences probably would have helped them do that a lot better. I would say Raid worse than the previous patch, so that would kind of keep it around the same, if not drop it a level. The Mythic Plus affix was significantly worse than the previous patch. Essences alone might even knock it up 2 levels, but I think with all of the other negatives, it probably stays around A. Benthic armor was terrible. The Mega Dungeon was awesome. But I would say this is a nice, strong A. Interestingly enough, though, recency bias is a bitch. If you were to do a Legion and BFA tier list of patches when this patch was out, and you, even after they made Essences account-wide, which initially was a big problem, but this is the whole patch, right? Not just right away. You would get slandered on the internet if you ranked this any BFA patch as an A in BFA. People were so fucking doomer in BFA about the expansion, and it was far better than people remember it to be. Okay, so I'm gonna keep it as a strong A for now. All right, maybe even more controversial. Battle for Azeroth: The Visions of N'Zoth. This depends on the way you play the game. If you were a casual, you probably hated this patch, as far as I can tell. This patch had one very, very negative thing that I want to get away right away. So people like accuse WoW of being like pay to win. I think it's a ridiculously stupid argument to make that. I mean, it's weird because pay to win is like has so many levels. Like, how can you call anything pay to win when like gacha phone games exist? So there needs to be like levels and like different phrases. I don't know how exactly it works, but this actually was pay to win, straight up. If you were in your guild, it was super RNG and hard to get corruption. And if someone in your guild, let's say you were a hunter in your guild and there was another hunter and there was one raid spot for the both of you, or if you're both vying to get into the same Mythic Plus groups, one person could swipe their credit card, buy some WoW tokens, which WoW tokens is a great system in general, but for this was super cringe. You could just like buy WoW tokens, go in the auction house, and you can buy the best corruption ever, and you would be significantly more powerful than that other player. Way more than the difference between them having the best Legion Legendary and you having the worst one. It was actually like a massive gap, and that was truly dog shit. That hasn't been the way the game has been played or really accurately described ever since, but that was definitely a very real thing. But I think corruptions overall were really good for the game. Overall, the accessibility initially was really bad. Everyone remembers that you had to wait multiple weeks. I think it was like a month maybe or more before they added a corruption vendor, maybe 2 months. And when they did, they put it on a fucking rotation for who knows what reason. You have like the entire community clamoring to get their shit, and it finally comes out and it's on a rotation. And if you wanted a very specific one, you had to wait like almost 5 weeks to actually get the one you wanted. So then that was a colossal failure by Blizzard's part. I could not imagine a viable argument as to why a rotation would have been put on that vendor. Crazy shit. Like really crazy shit. But that's most of the downside. Corruptions were fucking amazing for the game. I think a lot of people actually think back to the end of BFA as maybe the peak of WoW for a lot of people. It had the best dungeon set. If you're a Mythic Pluser especially, corruptions were awesome in Mythic Plus. It had arguably the best seasonal affix ever. I think the only one that's really consistently compared with Awakened is like Encrypted, and for some people Shrouded, as far as like the GOAT Mythic Plus affix. Super amazing. The raid was pretty good. The raid was definitely way better than Eternal Palace, but I don't know if I'd put it on Battle of Dazar Allore's level. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked about this a bit. I think there was some other things too. At this point, Azrite armor was like a little bit less annoying They also fixed the residum problem at this point, which we brought up earlier. I'm thinking this is like a slam dunk S tier. I think it's actually, if anyone were to argue that the end of BFA specifically was the best the game ever was, and S tier isn't going to be in any order, by the way. I wouldn't argue with them. And as you'll see, it's not really a coincidence that the last couple patches of every borrowed power expansion, once they spend an entire expansion giving you stuff, is bad. And you'll notice at the beginning of all these expansions feel like absolute shit is because you lost all of that and had to start again. And you just logged in the next day with your character feeling infinitely worse and less interesting than it was yesterday. And that's just a terrible thing. I'm glad they moved on from that now. But just looking back on it, it's not a surprise that basically every expansion just like ramps as it goes on. Oh, another thing is visions. Yeah, about this patch. So I think the best like little thing I've liked like visions is actually the Suramar scenario at the beginning of Legion. Shout out to that. Not super fun forever because like all those things are doomed to just be boring when there are some kind of chore you can do. But they are really fun initially. I think visions actually were really fun for a lot of people. It was certainly a chore for some people, but it was really fun to do them with no masks. Like, I remember people in my guild would, like, stream in Discord of them, like, speed running this, and, like, they just love doing it. I think it's really cool. Yeah, I don't know. Think overall really positive. So, Visions of N'Zoth, banger, banger, banger patch. Okay, World of Warcraft Shadowlands. So, Shadowlands had a lot going for it, but they made one very, very critical error. This is, I think, right after BFA is where they made world quests no longer grant Azerite power. We'll get to the critical error in a second. It's not this. But there's no more like grinding of Azerite power like there was in previous expansions. So world quests, while they were no longer required and that level of FOMO was gone, right? I think a lot of people basically never interacted with world quests ever again. And that definitely begs the question of like, was that the right thing to do? I hated the whole like, I need to grind artifact power thing. Some people are huge fans of it. Basically, you can actually determine it this way. If you are a year-long WoW player, if you are a season-long WoW player, you were going to log in all day, every day anyway, which is actually a very small amount of the WoW community. You actually were really pro Azerite and artifact power. But if you were a like seasonal player, someone who plays a ton early and then maybe plays some other games in the middle or near the end, and then they come back the next season usually, those people almost universally disliked artifact power because the feeling of you being behind because you aren't logging in was dog shit. So if you're ever wondering why some people are pro that and some people are against it, it's usually that exact distinction. And that was officially gone. So I think for a lot of people that took some away from the game. Covenants, unfortunately, this is the thing I was talking about earlier, huge disappointment. They were basically screamed at all beta long, hey, this is terrible, we hate this. Can you please let us swap these? Like, this swapping shit is ridiculous. They were like, no, trust, we got it. Obviously, later on, they ended up going away from it. But I think that absolutely lessened the fun for a ton of people at the beginning of this expansion. Also, conduit energy was still a thing at this point. Another thing all the way through the beta cycle, people were like, why does this exist? It's way less of a problem than Torghast kind of bombing, or which we'll get into in a second, or the Covenant not swapping thing. But it was kind of significant in the eyes of the community because there was no way to defend it. It made absolutely no sense. It was needlessly restrictive and it was only negative, and it was just mind-blowing that it existed, even though it barely impacted anyone, honestly. Torghast came out. It's supposed to be like a roguelike thing in WoW. Actually, in beta, it was really, really fun. Fun fact about that. So the person who created Torghast, it was his baby, the guy who developed it, actually got taken off the project of Torghast like a month or two, I think, out from the expansion, and it was given to a new team for him to work on some other things. And looking back in time, that's kind of when Torghast really started to go downhill in development and ended up being what it was. Obviously, anything that you have to have the entire... Roguelikes require difficulty to be interesting. That is the entire point. You want to go higher and higher. Sometimes you don't win, and you have to go back and hope you get better rolls next time or whatever. That's like that's part of roguelikes. If any roguelike was like, no matter what choices you make, you go to the end and you win, it would be dog shit content. Because they made Torghast have to be farmed weekly for upgrades for the entire WoW community, which includes some very good players, but also a ton of very bad ones, they had to nerf it because everyone needed it for their legendary mats, making the content an absolute and complete waste of time and the ultimate chore. Huge. I think Torghast is one of the biggest misses WoW has ever had, so hugely disappointing. Also, the zone here that they had at the beginning of the expansion was Maw, which I just think the whole not mounting thing was really weird and took a lot away from the zone. Like, I remember hearing people making the argument, I don't know if they were serious or not, but people would be like, well, you don't understand, like, this zone is like hell. And like, would it be fun to be in hell? Like, it's actually more lore accurate if like it sucks to be here. It's like, it's crazy to even say that. Like, bro, it's a video game, man. That's a ridiculous argument. Saying like, oh, you know what? It would actually suck to be in hell. So this game shouldn't be fun when you're in here. Like, what? Like, that's the kind of shit we were talking about here. Like, it was pretty rough zone. Not a lot of people enjoyed being in there. They brought legendaries back for the first class-wide legendaries for the first time since Legion. I don't know if they nailed it here with that. I don't think they were really interesting enough. Honestly, I think when they added the Covenant legendaries later and allowed you to wear 2 of them, it was kind of interesting, but that was way later in the expansion. I think only picking one, it made all of the cool utility and defensive legendaries never be selected ever, because that's the big thing they missed, is they did not understand how important throughput was this entire expansion. It was their entire thing they missed with the Covenants too. They were like, yeah, you know what? We have the people who are playing game 1 and game 2, and the people playing game 2 are only going to pick the stuff based on throughput. And then you had people who are like Noble, right? Like, he's like a big lore guy. He like made a video before the expansion, and some chatter was asking him like, oh, what Covenant are you going to play? Like, I don't know, the one that gives me the most damage. And like, they just totally missed that, like, in 2021 at the time, 2020, people play what's best. And they did a couple of polls, and they showed statistics of the amount of players on each class that were each Covenant, and it was resoundingly in favor of whatever one did the most damage, and not based on theme or lore or fantasy or anything. So it totally missed that. Swapping Covenants was terrible. Also, it was extremely expensive to craft legendaries, so like that, there was kind of just a worse version of the one that Legion was. Now let's get to the PvE side of it. The Mythic Plus season, this seasonal affix was really interesting. I forget the name of it. But it spawned a big red guy every 20%, and you killed it, and it gave you a damage buff. Just like before, how we talked about, prideful. Just how before how we talked about how some people in WoW like things for different reasons. I used the artifact power example. It's the exact same thing in dungeons. If you speak to someone who largely did key levels from 2 all the way up until, I guess prideful didn't exist on 2, from 10 all the way to like 20 to 22 to 23 to 23 probably, universally positive opinion on prideful. You killed an ad, you got a huge buff, and you just slapped everything. Mana wasn't an issue. Basically everyone was feeling great. Now if you talk to people who did really, really high keys, they universally dislike prideful. Because of the way that the affix scaled, it never became worth to actually do, so you had to do these very, very cringe ways to skip it. And you basically just didn't interact with the affix in a positive way at all, and it was only a nuisance. So if you talk to people who did super, super high keys, they actually, and most of them are content creators, which a lot of people also base their opinions off of, they'll have a universally negative opinion of prideful. So if you're wondering why there's a lot of positive and negative, that's, in my opinion, that's why. And then also, just, I think a general negative thing about it is, again, it's I think the second affix now at this point that was based on percentage count, and I just think those are always lame for the exact same reason I talked about before. The Shadowlands dungeon set. I think the Shadowlands dungeon set will be a little bit of a grower as the years go by, but not anywhere close to the level of BFA's. I think BFA just had objectively way more good dungeons than Shadowlands did. But I think Shadowlands dungeons like look really sick, and there were a couple of bangers in there for sure. So I wouldn't say that the dungeon set is a negative to Shadowlands at all. And then the raid. Castle Nathria is unassailably one of the best raids they've ever made. And the best raid they've made in a very long time. So it is just without question not nearly as bad as the beginning of BFA. That's just not, even with the Covenant thing and all, it's just not there. The beginning of Legion was also pretty rough. It is absolutely not at the level of Battle Bazaar lore, part of BFA. I'm thinking this is a good C. You could argue B, certainly not F. You could argue B, but I'm thinking C is going to make the most sense. In fact, I'd actually say it's better than the beginning of Legion, for what it's worth, which is basically just right up until Trial of Valor. So we're not really ordering these. We're not ordering within the tiers, but yeah, just for what it's worth. Okay, moving on to Shadowlands Chains of Domination. I guess before we rank it, I'm sure you guys are already pre-ranking it. This is one that I feel pretty strongly about. So one really good thing did happen in Chains of Domination, and that is this was the patch I think it was 9.1.5, where they fully went back on the covenant swapping thing, basically apologized for it. They unfortunately had one line that I will never forget, which was basically like, yeah, we're going to change it, but like just know that like people would not have experienced the beginning of Shadowlands the same if they wouldn't have restricted the covenants. It was like basically like, yo, we're sorry, we fucked up. Remember when you told us all that stuff in beta? Yeah, you were right. But also one more thing, we were right. And it was just like so off the, like, I don't know who the fuck wrote that or approved it. Terrible, terrible message. The raid was really interesting. I think the beginning of the raid was actually really good. Like Terragru, great first boss. The Eye, fine second boss. The 9, great third boss. Soul Render and Remnant, middle tier, not at the mid-tier wall yet. Bangers. Great, great early fights. Painsmith, one of the best, if not the best mid-raid wall ever. And then the raid fell off a fucking cliff. Guardian, massive disappointment. Fatescribe, massive disappointment. Kel'Thuzad, maybe one of the worst fights ever. And Sylvanas, kind of controversial. Most people's opinion of Sylvanas, I think, stems from it being a really long P2 on Heroic. Mythic makes it a little bit better. Mythic P1 kind of goes either way. People like it or hate it. I think it's an excellent phase. I think the only problem with the phase at all is that basically something that has nothing to do with the fight is the case, and that is that Moonkin's class design at the moment was the only class in the entire game that did the damage profile. Like, basically the damage profile of Starfall is just untouchable by anything else in the game, and that was a problem with that. If you take that part away from P1 Sylvanas, it's just a great phase. Sylvanas P2, I just don't think it was a great phase. I think they could have made that a lot shorter or just better. And I think P3 Sylvanas, I would actually argue P3 Sylvanas is probably as good as any singular end boss phase ever. That's how good it was. So I cannot say Sylvanas is bad when parts of the fight were awesome. But parts of the fight were also really bad. But I think Sylvanas kind of lost people before that. Dungeons. What the fuck was the... Oh, yeah, Tormented, right? Wasn't it Tormented? It was like the Torghast power little choose things for Mythic Plus. I think... It's weird. So many people quit playing. This is a little bit of a spoiler. So many people quit playing the game during the season because of a lot of reasons. And so a lot of people didn't even interact with it. But for the people I know that played Mythic Plus, they thought it was okay. It was super mid, though. Like the upside was it wasn't annoying, but there was like you just made the same choices all the time. And it just was super, super weird. Also around this time, there was a bunch of lawsuits at Blizzard that I think had some people lose a decent amount of interest in the game. At the same time, it's when Final Fantasy gained a lot of popularity. So I think this was a patch where a lot of people just tried Final Fantasy. But we'll just probably just stick to the stuff in the WoW patch and try to keep it specifically to the content of WoW. The reason I'm mentioning those two things is a lot of guilds died, and I think it was a combination of Final Fantasy, the lawsuits, and the patch being really weak. Blizzard removed tier sets at the beginning of BFA, and this was the first thing we saw back in relation to them. In fact, I think they even mentioned tier sets as kind of like a general like idea for why these domination shards existed. But I think it was the worst way to do that. I think domination shards is one of the worst things that have ever happened to the game. Again, a level of pure RNG, probably only seen and felt by like what the beginning of Legion felt like. If you just looted a Shadow or Blood set in like the first week or two, you were just infinitely more powerful than everyone else. The race to world first, luckily, was not really decided by this. I think there was like 1 or 2 domination shard bonuses different between us and Echo at the time, but it was very small. It could have been something much larger than that. There were some guilds that we knew in the top 20 that had 2 bonuses and some that had 15. You would have been unable to compete with that. Race to world first, very small part of the game, but this is my list and my opinion, so like obviously that's going to affect it a little bit. But I think it affected a lot of people. I think just domination shards were just a horrible, horrible system. I think they're indefensible. Everything about tier sets that was cool did not exist in domination shards. It was super RNG to acquire for no reason, by the way. It was it wasn't even cool that you did damage with this. By the end of the patch, these domination shards were doing like 20 to 30% of your damage, and you did not interact with it in any way. It was just passive damage. They didn't work in Mythic Plus the same way they worked in Raid. Yeah, just really bad. Korthia was, to be honest with you, I have no opinion. What do you guys think of Korthia? I didn't go in Korthia ever. I didn't do a single fucking quest in that zone. I know nothing about Korthia. Was it bad or good? I liked it. 11 out of 10. It was shit. It was great. It was dog shit. Interesting. So about as polarizing as you could get. Mostly bad responses from chat, but yeah, I like the duality of man in there. Yeah, one major thing is this was a way, like the end of 9.1 was probably better than 9.0 though, because you were able to swap covenants again. But the thing is so many people quit during 9.1, so I'm going to count this towards it. So many people quit in 9.1 that people saw the feature that you could now swap covenants as almost like a benefit to 9.2 because they did not experience it because they had already quit. So it was like, it's so strange. But yeah, the combination of Painsmith, Final Fantasy, the patch being bad, and lawsuits killed a fuck ton of guilds, for sure. I barely played this patch for the first time in like forever because this patch was so rough. I would say that Sanctum of Domination 9.1 is significantly worse than the beginning of Battle for Azeroth in its own tier. I would put it in whatever tier this is here. So I'm just going to squiggle something. Whatever that is. That's what it is. It's bad. Really, really bad. Shadowlands Eternity's End. So at this point, you can now swap covenants freely at the beginning of a content patch. They added the Catalyst for the first time, which I actually think the Catalyst is one of the best things they've added to World of Warcraft in a very long time. The fact that it comes so late means that it's only able to reach like probably like 10% of its overall potential of like what that could mean to the game, really, because it's just like so much later than it should be. Zareth Mortis, for people who interacted with it, said it was one of the better zones they've made in a while. The Mythic Plus affix is arguably the best affix, right up there with Awakened and Encrypted. I personally Mythic Plus this season, and I had an absolute fucking... I loved that affix. I fucking loved that affix. The raid's very polarizing. I mean, it's mostly negative, but like there are some people that really, really fucking... I mean, it had some of the best bosses ever. Like Rygalon and Halandris and Anduin are all like fucking all-time great fights on Mythic. But yeah, I don't know. A lot of Anduin killed just as many any guilds as any other boss that's ever existed. Oh wait, Max, you forgot to give credit to 9.0 for Vault. Oh, for the Great Vault. That's actually a really good point. I don't think it changes its ranking, but I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Basically in BFA they had like a Mythic Plus and a PvP cache, and in Shadowlands they upgraded that to the Great Vault, and which has just been infinitely better thing. Great Vault has been just really good for the game. Yeah, I mean, this is the most nerfed raid of all time. Anduin is the most nerfed boss of all time. In fact, I don't know if Frank can do this if I end up putting this on YouTube and he edits it. I wonder if he can put the screenshot of all the Anduin notes. I've looked at a picture of all the Anduin notes at some point, and it is absolutely insane how many lines of text there are that have nerfed this fight, on Heroic specifically. Heroic Anduin is the most nerfed fight in the history of this game, and it might be twice as much as the next thing. So yeah, that was bad. I mean, I feel like this patch was just better than the last one. I feel like it was better than the beginning of the expansion. It had such a great Mythic Plus affix. I'm kind of leaning towards the end of Shadowlands being in C, but then that would make me feel like the beginning of Shadowlands was an F, and I just don't agree with that. Question, are we including Season 4 into this patch? I think you have to, because it's not anywhere else on this list. Season 4 is fucking amazing. I'll still never understand any human that has negative thoughts about Season 4. I think the only negative interaction that Season 4 has from the community is they view it as a full season. Like, they're like, wait, you're telling me that, like, all these people got together and, like, they made this season and this is how much content is there? I feel like that's the only perspective you could have to actually hate this other than just being a doomer. This patch was made by 3 people. Hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, make every regular WoW season. This one was entirely done by 3 people. And it was just to make the end of the expansion a little bit more palatable rather than having a super, super long last season, which in this expansion would have been extra long because they had a shortened, it's a COVID expansion, right? And I think Season 4 was fucking awesome for a while. I think the faded affixes weren't relevant, really. I don't think, like, you could have just brought back the 3 raids and rotated them and not had affixes, and it would have been just as good or better. I don't think the affixes added anything. In fact, they added a lot of lag, if anything, as a major negative. So that was really cool. And the Mythic Plus affix is, again, one of people's favorites. For people who did it, Shrouded was really cool. So, yeah. If you have to add that, I would add points. I would put it in B for me. And my other guess is that I think most people, recency bias, very negative towards Shadowlands. I think right now this is going to be a spicy B, but I think that over time this will be a more accepted answer. Just like how if you called the end of BFA an S or an A tier in BFA or right after BFA, people would have called you fucking crazy. But I think that's true now. I'm gonna future proof this a little bit. I could be wrong, and here's my thinking. Chains of Domination was significantly worse in the beginning of Shadowlands. Probably 2 full ranks. That kind of makes sense. I would say that Season 3 of Shadowlands is definitely better than the beginning of Shadowlands. So I can't put it in the same tier. And the beginning of Shadowlands was not an F. I think this is good. I would put this here, and I think there's an argument even for A, to be honest with you. But I'll leave it at B. All right, cool. So we're done with Shadowlands. So go to the beginning of Dragonflight. Okay, so Dragonflight did one major thing. So they kind of moved away from the borrowed. All of these expansions outside of Shadowlands having a little hiccup, it's like, generally speaking, it's like bad, good, great as the expansion goes on. Dragonflight moved away from all of the borrowed power stuff that would have done that. And they also gave you infinitely more content at the beginning of the expansion. So if you remember how bad it felt to play Legion and then log into BFA, I mean, terminally bad. It felt fucking trash to lose all that. Remember how it felt to log in at the beginning of Shadowlands? You lost all of your corruption. You lost all of your essences. And then you replaced that with covenants that you couldn't really swap. Felt really bad. Beginning of Dragonflight felt fucking awesome. I think maybe the most impressive thing Blizzard has to their credit is the beginning of Dragonflight, even before the first fucking season came out. People were farming rares for the first 2 weeks of the expansion for just small, minute, tiny item level increases. Like it was crack. Like people were addicted to getting these rares. Everyone. It was huge on Twitch. It was huge in game. People were digging dirt. And all of it was irrelevant. Like, I am so impressed with Blizzard completely captivating the WoW community, farming gear for 2 weeks incessantly. And none of it mattered. You replaced every piece of gear that you farmed, you replaced within like a few days of the season starting. It was all irrelevant. Maybe even less than a day. And I don't know how the fuck they did that. There was no other beginning of the expansion that was anything like that. So super impressive. What are the things they added this expansion? So the talent tree stuff. I think the talent trees have gotten better as they've gone on. I think they're a universal huge dub over the old talent system for sure. Way more evident in the classes they're reworking recently. And they were actually really, really quick to be fixing a lot of stuff at the beginning of Dragonflight. Dragon riding. Awesome. So good that I don't know if we could ever go back, and I don't know exactly how they're going to tackle all of the mounts that we've had forever can't dragon ride thing. I think they said they were going to work on updating a few of the old dragon models to be able to do it, but like even then, I still think there's hundreds of mounts they might need to update. Like something so good that anytime you're just regular natty flying, it feels like shit. So great. They had a bunch of cool world events that people actually engaged with, like the soup thing. Then they added professions. I think they had a really ambitious profession idea. I still don't know if that ever actually hit. Basically, what they were going for was like, yo, we want you guys to do professions. And if you're a profession maker, if you're a blacksmith, people in the realm are going to know you as not just the blacksmith who can make this item, but specifically the blacksmith that can make the best helms. That sounded insanely ambitious, and I think it was. I don't think that was ever... Like, maybe in the first couple weeks of the expansion that was the case, but that's not really a thing. I think this would have been an awesome thing in the past, like having to find people through trade and stuff. I think people just kind of want to put it in there and just get their item back, you know? I think my take is that I think professions were a little bit of a miss. I don't know if it was a failure, but I don't think they, like, absolutely fucking knocked it out of the park. Also, now we're 2 patches into, or I guess 1 total patch, into an expansion that is moving much faster and has much more content. Like, the amount of things we are getting in, like, a 0.5 or a 0.0.5 or a 0.0.7, those things that's, like, more content than we would normally see at the beginning of a patch. And we're just getting it in the middle of a patch. their like roadmap for the amount of things coming out in a year, compare that to like a Shadowlands thing. Shadowlands maybe is a bad example because it was the COVID expansion. Maybe compare it to another one. They are pushing out content faster and making much more content than they've ever had. That is not deniable. Also, something kind of weird that I'm saying this right now because the meta is what it is. But for the large part of this expansion, the class balance in this game is better than it has ever been. And it's not an accident. It's because Blizzard is constantly tuning classes. Probably, I remember I actually like looked this up. Somewhere in like 10.0.7, it was somewhere along the lines of like they had done more balancing by 10.0 to 10.0.7, which was not even the first major patch. They did about twice as many tuning changes in that period of time than they normally do in an entire expansion for the past 5 or 6 years. That's the level we're talking about. Just a massive, massive amount of tuning. They paid so much closer attention. And my theory as to why is they're not spending an entire patch thinking of the new borrowed power system for the next patch and balancing and tuning that. And it allows the class people to kind of just be looking at the classes. And then augmentation hit, which we can kind of get into later. We're not talking about Embers of Neltharion right now, but you get the idea. Evokers, I think, have largely been a really cool addition. I think it's like one of the cooler classes they've added. It's been nice. First initial patch, preservation was like super, super insane. Then the second patch, then devastation was insane. And now augmentation, they've like taken turns. The leveling experience in Dragonflight was actually significantly better than normal. Kind of the only reason I haven't mentioned leveling in other ones, it's like noticeably better now. I think it got better at the end of, was it the end of BFA or Shadowlands when they like really revamped leveling, but it was a lot better. Yeah, I don't know. So I have a lot of opinions about our current patch. But the beginning of Dragonflight, I think it is without question the best beginning of an expansion that we've ever had. Currently, the best beginning expansion we have here is the tie between Legion and Shadowlands. I would put it in A, and again in no particular order. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about a few other things. Fuck. Maybe here's something that keeps it from S. Mythic Plus and Raid. Vault of the Incarnates is like a pretty weak raid. I think if you only experience this game on Heroic, that's not the opinion of my list here, but I think you could have had a pretty positive opinion of Vault of the Incarnates, actually, because I think Razageth was one of the best Heroic end bosses they've made. Really, really fucking good. Mythic Razageth is like one of the worst fights they've made, and I think there was a lot of fights they missed on in Vault anyway. I think me and Dratnos ranked the bosses recently, and it was like just a crazy low amount of good bosses in that raid. Like we were ranking the worst bosses ever list, like some from Vault came in on that, and like in the best bosses list, some from this raid, multiple from this raid would have shown up on that. So yeah, it was a big problem there. Mythic Plus had its last potentially ever seasonal affix in Thundering, a affix that kind of universally tanked that season. I think people really, really disliked it. It was also the first time that this expansion, one thing that's very positive for it is every season now, you have brand new Mythic Plus dungeons. You have dungeons, you have 8, and I have asked them in interviews, they are set on the number 8. They're having 8 new dungeons every season. I don't know if that's going to continue the whole season. Like next season, for example, I imagine they're going to do both mega dungeons. That's 2 of them. And then let's say they bring 4 dungeons back from the past, just like they have been. Okay, that's 6. What do you do with the other 2? Do you bring back 1 dungeon from season 1 and 1 dungeon from season 2? Then it's not necessarily a full new season. I don't know exactly what they'll do, but either way, I think that will go over well. I think so far it absolutely has. There was a lot of friction initially. All WoW players hate change in general, but also I think people were just like, no, I don't want to do that. I want all 8 Dragonflight dungeons at once. I think it's been overall very positive. But the seasonal affix Thundering definitely made it a lot worse. So, all right. I think yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I would say how good the game was in Season 3 of BFA, I would agree with the first season of Dragonflight being on that level. Okay, second patch. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I could be totally wrong about this because this is the patch that we're like currently in. And, you know, recency bias, time will tell. I feel like we almost have to look at this before augmentation and after. But you know what? For some people, is augmentation entering the game would be a massive negative. And for some people, before augmentation enters the game, it would be a massive positive. I would actually tell you right now, most players absolutely love Augmentation Evoker, right? So like they're like, oh, holy fuck, this is sick. But if you're someone who really cares about the meta and balance, and maybe don't play a class in the God comp right now, you're probably mad as hell. And those people are usually the loudest. Let's just get to basics. So new raid, significantly better than the old raid. I actually think Aberrus is one of the better raids they've made recently, with one huge stain being Skarn, really. Really, really big stain. But they also have really, really highs too. Because like Magmarax, as much as it's a letdown design wise, is like that you don't care. You just do Magmarax and it's fine. Bro, Skarn was a problem. So, not great. Or overall, I think the raid was good. Sorry, not great. This is the first season in a very long time that we haven't had a seasonal affix. I get mixed answers when I talk to people. Basically, the answer I get is I ask people, like, would this season be better with, like, or how would you like this season if it had infested or beguiling or thundering? And they're like, I would hate it. I would not like it as much. And then I ask them, well, how would you like this season if it had encrypted or awakened or whatever other affix you like? And they're like, oh, it would be better. So, like, it's weird. You're basically asking them if it has a good seasonal, it would be a better expansion. A better season, if it had a bad seasonal, it would be worse. Which makes sense, right? It sounds easy. But then that's like makes you wonder how Blizzard continues with seasonals, because like it's just like a coin flip. So that's been interesting. I haven't done a lot of the Mythic Plus patch. I can tell from people who've done it that I don't think they feel as good about this set as they do Season 1. And a large reason for that is I hear that they've made a lot more consistent and good changes to Season 1 dungeons tuning-wise, and they have not done that as much in Season 2. Polarizingly enough, class balance in 10.1 was probably the best it's ever been. And class balance in 10.1.5, as I am currently speaking about this, is probably the worst that it's ever been. I'm going to like future-proof this a little bit. This patch is going to last another 3 months. I think even maybe after the changes next week, that kind of goes down a little bit. Some people, augmentation lives rent-free in their minds. Absolutely. They're going to always remember this patch as when augmentation came out, and they're going to hate it. And a far, far, far greater amount of people are going to remember this as the patch that augmentation came out, and they're going to love it for that. So I really feel weird about this. I feel like Mythic Plus has been slightly worse. The raid was slightly better. Augmentation is polarizing in both ways, but I would say it's largely positive. And if anything, you knew when it was going to come out, it was going to have a ton of growing pains. We've talked about this a million times on the channel with other people, but yeah, like there's no world where they're going to introduce a brand new role into this game and it was just going to be like smooth sailing. Like a lot of people are fucking mad. They're going to need to figure it out, but also a lot of people fucking love it. I want to say it's like the same. I don't know. I would say parts of it make it better, but I wouldn't say that this patch, just feel-wise, let's start looking at context. Does this second patch of Dragonflight feel like the end of Legion or the end of BFA? My opinion, definitely not. It does not feel that good. Does this patch feel better than Season 3 of Shadowlands, Season 2 of BFA, and like Trial of Valor early Legion? It doesn't feel that bad. I feel like it's just still an A. I feel like it's kind of it's changed some things, maybe not for the better or for the worse, but it's kind of just maintained that maintained. So basically, man, it's so hard to talk about this. Would you guys say, even the big doomers, in 10.1, not 10.1.5, but 10.1, do you think the game was better than 10.0? Including the raid, the Mythic Plus season, everything. Even slightly. So before 10.1.5. And then it sounds like you guys are saying that you think 10.1.5 is worse than 10.0. So it sounds... So I think it pretty naturally fits in right here. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell for me because like I haven't played this game a lot this patch, but that has a lot of external factors. Like Diablo came out, but that's real though. Like I knocked 9.1 because like a lot of people quit during this patch, but like some of that didn't have to do with WoW, right? It had to do with Blizzard, which wasn't like really a WoW thing. It had to do with Blizzard and had to do with Final Fantasy. And then it definitely had to do with WoW, right? Like a lot of it had to do with WoW, but not all of it. Same thing in this patch. Like D4 absolutely nuked a lot of the player base for a while. Oh, actually another thing about this patch. Let's be real here. I don't even know how the fuck I didn't mention this. The fucking gearing system. The gearing system in 10.1 is actually a fucking mountain better than it was in 10.0. And I haven't even considered that for this ranking. I don't know if it bounces it up a thing, because I still think we haven't seen the repercussions of that. Like, it's weird. Like, the whole new gearing system is going to give you instant gratification. You're going to feel great instantly, but it does potentially hurt long term. Maybe not for everyone, but that's the design. What you're afraid of. It's basically like if you feel like you normally get a nice 1-2 months out of WoW and you love it, but now you're only giving it a month because you got geared right away and you didn't want to play any alts or something. Like, it's hard to tell because like D4 was in there too. I feel like it's just you need more sample size with this gearing system, but the gearing system overall huge W for anyone playing the game. So I would say that. I would say the only way that you wouldn't really agree with an A tier ranking here is if you like basically instantly quit for D4 and we're like, oh, I didn't even really play this patch, in which you would kind of not have an opinion, or you are someone who hates augmentation so much that one thing alone would put this all the way into like the bottom tier, which like, you know, that's your opinion. People feel very strongly about it. Those people are usually very loud. I can tell from polls that I've run, from talks that I've had with other people, the feeling on augmentation is overwhelmingly positive, but the people who really, really don't like it are very loud and really, really, really fucking hate it. But still, largely, a lot of people are still very pro augmentation. Okay, that's it. Now we get to listen to Dratty T's take.